Welcome everyone to this channel where I will be sharing episode reviews of that 1960s television show that I enjoy so much, Lost in Space. I encourage you to like and subscribe so that you don't miss each new installment as I work my way through all 83 episodes of this wonderful series. Up next, Season 1, Episode 25, The Space Croppers. An alien family arrives and they sow crops that will grow to consume everything on the Robinsons' planet. Dr. Smith, however, schemes to marry the matriarch of the family, hoping to find a place aboard their spaceship when they leave, and ultimately getting back to Earth. Well, here we are, the beginning of the end. Or at least that's the way I think it feels to a lot of fans, that this episode is the one that will set the tone for much of the rest of the series. I get that, but don't believe that to actually be the case. Without question, The Space Croppers is one of the weaker episodes across all of Season 1. I think, however, it's much better than its reputation, and in some ways, it's actually quite good. I'll share some of my reasons why later in this review, but first, on with our story. Smith, Will, Penny, and the robot are placing items into a time capsule. Will suggests getting back to the Jupiter as it's getting late, but Smith dismisses the concern. Just then, they hear a howling off in the distance. Smith fears that it must be a werewolf, and the robot actually confirms that it is a Canis lupus, and it is ferocious. They start to head back to the ship when the robot announces that the Canis lupus is in the area. Just then, the werewolf emerges from behind a large rock. Smith believes that they must stare him down, but it is Will who orders the robot to blast him with an electrical charge. The creature backs away, and we see the camera follow the werewolf's tracks as they transform from animal to human. Later that evening, we see the Robinson family gathered around the dinner table. John is chastising Smith for not completing a task that was assigned to him, that being a pipeline to supply the camp with water. Smith hints around their run-in with a werewolf, but it is Penny who finally tells everyone that there was a werewolf and it tried to attack them. John questions Smith and says that if he thinks it really was a werewolf, Smith should go on a safari and capture it. The next morning, we see Smith working on the pipeline as Will comes along. He offers to help Smith finish the pipeline so they can go on the safari together, but Smith, not anxious for that adventure, says that his work must come first. He then goes into one of his hyperbolic descriptions of how he would hunt down and then corner the beast. Will comes up with a plan that will allow them to go on the safari right away. He programs the robot to dig the trench, and they begin their hunt at the site of their time capsule. There, they discover that the capsule has been ransacked. Everything is gone. Smith discovers tracks. Will draws his laser, and they begin to follow them. As Smith and Will are examining the last of the tracks, we see a large humanoid creature step up to them, wearing rags and a tattered hat. Startled, they back up as the figure grabs their laser pistols from them. Smith, in his uniquely comedic manner, tries to express that they are hunting for a werewolf.
Now attend, sir.
Of course, the alien creature does not understand. He loses patience and then orders them both to march off to his camp. As they approach that site, Will notices a sign with alien language and wonders if it means that the land is posted and they were trespassing. Then they get their first glimpse at the alien spaceship. It's all open like a front porch, complete with a pair of rocking chairs. A young woman comes out to see Smith and Will, finding both humor and wonder in the two of them. She turns to the tall male alien and calls him Keel, who by that time had inserted the business end of Will's laser into his mouth. He does not speak, but gestures to where he found Smith and Will. She challenges Smith for being on what she calls her land, as Will realizes that she's wearing his mother's gauntlets. and then sees everything else from their time capsule lying on a chair. The young woman orders Keel to get back to work in the fields when Will asserts that he's got their guns. The young woman responds that they will get everything back once they are confident that none of these items will be used against them. As Smith tries to assert his own rights, the woman says her name is Ephra and she has neither heard nor is concerned with such laws. She does, however, talk a bit about their travels, which catches Smith's attention.
And the constellation of the Southern Fish, and we even was to Earth once.
Earth?
Yeah. Only I didn't like it because there was too many people like you. Too much fighting and feuding.
That's probably because you landed in a...
She goes on to say that they will only be on this planet temporarily, long enough to plant their crops and yield a harvest before moving on. It is at this moment that Ephra's mother calls out.
Ephra! Ephra, I won't have it. Conversing with strangers again. You get back to the brew.
All right, Ma.
It's mother, not Ma.
Smith says that they are on safari looking for a werewolf, but the mother has an interesting perspective on that as well.
The werewolf. It's a very dubious pretext, one I can hardly accept. Werewolves are the unhealthy machinations of timid little minds. Now be off with you.
But, madam...
Be off.
With that, she throws them off their land at the point of a laser rifle. Once Will and Smith are gone, she opens up what is essentially their nursery for their young plants and has some interesting things to say to them.
You're hungry little devils, aren't you? Well, you won't have long to wait. And then, when you have provided for me and my family, all the rest of this land will be yours. All this land, and everything that's on it, every living thing.
Back at the Jupiter, Smith is offering a somewhat romanticized version of their interaction with the croppers. He imagines that the matriarch is a widow, possibly lonely, and only wishes she had a man to help her with her burdens. Don implies that Smith's interests go no further than the fact that they have a ship capable of traveling to Earth. John asks about the werewolf, and Smith now says that possibly he may not even exist. Don and John ask when they can meet these visitors, and I always get a smile out of Will's response.
I think we'd all like to meet him.
Oh, you will. They need a little more time to settle in. They're not quite ready to receive visitors.
Oh, is that what they said?
Yeah, with a shotgun.
We next see Don and Judy stepping out of the Jupiter to discover someone, Keel, ravaging through their garden. Don runs over, but is manhandled by the much larger Keel. That is until Ephra arrives and demands that he mind his manners and put him down. Ephra introduces herself and apologizes for Keel, saying that food is in short supply until their crops come in. Then Ephra cozies up to Don. I'd say she's flirting with him, but indeed she is much more than simply flirting. Of course, this compels Judy to come running over to demand that Ephra keep her hands to herself. About this time, John and Maureen also step out of the ship and approach Ephra and Keel. Ephra says that she would like to borrow some seasoning until such time as their crops come in. Maureen asks Judy to retrieve it, and we can only smile at the way Judy takes on the task. I also smile a bit at John reacting to Judy's attitude. Ephra admires the Jupiter and asks where they've been. Her response to John is a bit foretelling.
We hope to get off soon.
Well, I hope not before we get us our crops raised. Oh, well, what I mean is, well, you can all come over and join us for a meal. Ma's are right.
Smith comes out of the Jupiter and calls Ephra's visit a pleasant surprise and tries to carry on as though they are all close friends. Ephra, however, makes it quite clear that it is actually to the contrary.
Give your dear mother my kindest regards. I did so much enjoy meeting her.
didn't look like you enjoyed it.
That evening, the Robinsons are awakened inside the Jupiter to the sound of chanting off in the distance. They follow the sounds which leads them to the fields that are being planted by the croppers in a rather ceremonious manner. They are, however, greeted with abrupt hostility.
Bela!
You should not have come. Earthly folks got no business here.
We heard the chanting, and we thought you wouldn't mind if we dropped in.
We wouldn't mind if you dropped out, the same way you dropped in.
The matriarch threatens to sick keel on them, but John concedes they will leave. Before they go, Ephra slips a leaf of one of their plants into Don's shirt, as she says, as a remembrance. Everyone leaves, but Smith, however, lingers behind. Still enchanted by the possibilities the Cropper's spaceship offers, he attempts to ingratiate himself with the matriarch. She remains rather sternly unimpressed, but Smith, being Smith, is undeterred and continues to flatter her until she finally makes it amply clear that she has neither time for chats nor neighbors. With that, Smith does finally leave. The next morning, however, we see him and Will pulling a cart filled with supplies that he intends to gift to the Croppers. Will questions his motives, but Smith claims that what he's doing is a simple act of altruism. When they arrive at the Croppers' ship, they get their first look at how quickly and dramatically their plants have grown. Smith approaches the matriarch and once more does his best to flatter her. She continues to respond negatively, and how can we not smile at Will's question and Smith's response?
Can't you tell when you're not welcome, Dr. Smith?
Faint hearts never won fair, lady. Come along.
She steps onto the front porch of their spaceship and has a seat. Smith formally introduces himself, and the matriarch finally introduces herself as Sibylla. Smith then waxes poetic about the sound of their names together. Will, however, interrupts to ask about their ship, much to the annoyance of Smith. While Sibylla actually agrees with Will's assessment of what Smith has to say, it is also clear that she is beginning to enjoy the flattery.
Well, I don't see why not. It's a lot more sensible than what you've been saying.
You've got a point there, Sonny. What was that about a work of art?
Your name, Sibylla. It's a name.
To Will's continuing questions, Sibylla leaks a bit of a hint as to the nature of their plants.
You'll be leaving soon, now that the crop's in.
When our plants have been fed all the nourishment this planet has to offer.
What kind of nourishment?
If the boy's dull agricultural talk is annoying to you, Sibylla.
That's how we live, by agriculture. It's not his talk that's dull, it's yours.
It wouldn't be so.
Unwaveringly, Smith begins to introduce the idea of joining Sibylla to help with her burdens, while, as he says it, traveling to Earth.
As well, I'm not complaining.
But think what an added joy it would be if you had companionship. Someone to stand beside you as you traveled earthward, or any other place in the galaxy. Someone to share your...
We next see Smith using the robot to validate the compatibility between he and Sibylla. The robot, however, has difficulty sorting out the data as they were described by Smith in quite glowing terms.
Very important.
Information received, highly suspicious. Such perfection is too good to be true. Computers reject the challenge.
Of all the incompetent moronic lumps.
Well, maybe you did tell a couple of whoppers about yourself, Doctor.
I did nothing of the kind.
Meanwhile, back at the Croppers' ship, we see Sibylla fiddling with some makeup. Ephra thinks she's falling too easily for Smith, but then the conversation begins to turn to the carnivorous nature of their plants.
At watching the little green things grow.
You gonna tell him the truth about them little green things if he comes around again?
What he doesn't know won't hurt him.
I think that sweet talking of his is doing things to you, Ma.
Oh, pooh. Though I must say, it's been too long since I've been flattered so much. If our little green growing things would settle for 6 delicacies instead of 7, I might take Zachary with us.
Just then, Smith arrives with a small bouquet of flowers for Sybilla. After only a few moments of his flattery, Ephra becomes disgusted and leaves. In typical fashion, Smith presses on with his flattery, while Sybilla, in equally typical fashion, is critical while at the same time actually inviting more.
Well, you might try some more of that sweet talk you were so full of the other day. Only make it good and sincere.
I could never be anything but sincere with you, Sybilla.
At the Jupiter, Don is working near the garden when Ephra arrives and presents an offer of her own, that Don come away with her. Don is rather abrupt, saying that Ephra's future does not include him. With that, Ephra's charm turns into fury. Don tells her to move on, she threatens to put a spell on him, and Don is rather dismissive of both Ephra and her threat. Don steps away, and as Ephra begins to leave, she sees Will tinkering with the robot. She tells Will that she needs a lock of Don's hair to make a keepsake and wants Will to get it for her. Will is reluctant to do so. Ephra then sees the moons rising and says she needs to get back to their ship. Then, with some more of that fury, she grabs Will by the shoulders and demands that he get her that lock of hair and runs off. Will turns to the robot, pops in his power pack, and asks him for his insights. Here, the robot declares that the aliens' female guises are deceptive and caution must be exercised in dealing with them. Will is now determined to warn Smith of that danger. We cut, however, to Smith's cabin inside the Jupiter as he is busy packing. Everyone gathers as Smith announces his pending nuptials to Sybilla. As always, when it comes to Don and Smith, there's a fun little quip.
You see before you the happiest man in the world. Sybilla has promised to be my wife.
Not the witch.
I shall treat that slur with the contempt it deserves.
Then John says that he's studied their plants and they contain the most lethal virus he's ever seen. Smith, blinded by the prospect of using their ship to get back to Earth, is undeterred, even suggesting that there will be a wedding rehearsal, including the robot as his best man. Everyone remains silent as Smith grabs his bag and bids them all adieu. Judy asks the obvious question, and John offers the equally obvious response.
Well, can't we stop him?
Ever try stopping an irresistible force?
That evening, Will is out looking for Smith to warn him about what he learned from the robot, that the Cropper's human female appearance is only a guise. On the journey, he quickly discovers that the Cropper's plants have grown wildly. He wanders among them when he is startled by the werewolf. The werewolf approaches, Will backs away, and ultimately falls into one of the giant plants. Just then, we see Ephra out, looking and calling for Keel. She hears Will's cries for help and comes running over. Ephra calls the werewolf Keel and tells him to get Will out of there. He does, and she then orders him back to the fields. Ephra angrily grabs Will by the shoulders and asks if he had the lock of Don's hair for her.
No.
I'd have let you be eat up if I'd have known that. It's too late now, I reckon. Gotta be leaving. It's more than I can say for you and yours. Cute little fella.
After Ephra runs off, Will becomes even more alarmed about warning Smith of the danger. At the Cropper's ship, we see Smith continuing to romance Sybilla, who seems not especially charmed. Will arrives and says it bluntly, that their female guise is deceptive. Smith can only think of his upcoming nuptials, but Will is dismissive of it all, setting a negative tone for both Smith and Sybilla. Will continues with his warning.
Dr. Smith, you don't belong with her or with them. You belong with us. And you don't know what terrible things are going to happen to you if you go with them. And you'll be too far away for us to help you.
I could dissolve him very easily from here. I could squash him squishy.
Dr. Smith, her female guise is deceptive. She's not an Earth creature and you are. That's what the robot told me.
As you can plainly see, the robot is a silly goose who knows not whereof he speaks.
It's no use, is it?
Conceding that Smith will not come back with him, we have a very nice goodbye scene that is punctuated with a fun bit of comedy.
And this is goodbye, Dr. Smith. I know we've had our arguments and fights before, but they never really meant much. And I'm sorry for the times I wasn't very nice to you. I'm gonna miss you, Dr. Smith.
Thank you, dear boy, and I shall miss you too. After we are married, and if we happen to be passing this way again, I shall send down a wedding picture and a piece of wedding cake. Ha! Yes, dear.
Goodbye, Dr. Smith.
Goodbye, Will.
Will returns to the Jupiter and is chastised by John for being out and in danger when Maureen tells him that he was trying to do a good deed in persuading Smith to come back with him. Then Will tells them about how the crop they planted is growing everywhere. Also, that he was approached by the werewolf and Ephra called him Keel, and how Keel and the werewolf may be one and the same. Later that evening, the Robinsons are awoken by a ruckus noise. They rush to the upper deck and discover that the Croppers' plants have completely taken over. Armed with gas guns, John, Maureen, Don, and Will try to cut a path and make their way to the Croppers' ship. Meanwhile, at the Croppers' ship, we see Smith somewhat characteristically sitting idle, with his arms folded while Sibylla does all the work of packing. Smith tells her that he was musing about their destination, which he hopes will include Earth. But Sibylla says the matter of their destination has already been settled, that they are headed for the constellation of the Big Whale, and that Earth is much too far out of the way. Just then, Ephra comes by, and Sibylla asks about Keel. Smith gets his first real peek at what he's getting himself into, as Ephra says he's still out there howling at the moons. Smith becomes alarmed, and Sibylla tries to calm him by saying that Keel won't harm him now that he's one of the family. However, she goes on to warn Smith about Ephra. She calls her a problem child, though she only practices her witchcraft when she's bored or irritated. As she says it,
and then she does some pretty spooky things.
She does?
Of course, she inherited those powers from her father, and not from me. My darling little witch child, he used to call her. She absolutely gets carried away when the plants are eating. She may ask you to hover in the sky. She may suspend you up there. But if she does, you just outsmart her. You hang up there and close your eyes. It's better not to look while the plants are eating. It gets very messy.
Smith asks about what the plants do, and Sibylla waxes poetic about how and what they consume. She then calls for Keel by howling. This elevates Smith's alarm, who says he needs to run back to the Jupiter for something, but Sibylla warns him that it's too dangerous as the plants are eating. Smith continues to back away just as he is grabbed by Keel, who is in full-blown werewolf. Smith breaks away and runs off, relieved to find the Robinsons making their own journey among the plants. Along with Smith, they all work to kill off the plants when suddenly they see the Croppers' ship lift off. In spite of his terror just a moment ago, Smith now seems sad to see them all go. Our next scene introduces our next episode, and I will once again withhold my comments until my review of that episode, All That Glitters. So a few more thoughts about the Space Croppers. I think many fans dislike this one as they see it as the beginning of the end of the serious space sci-fi adventure and the beginning of Season 2 silliness. I get that, as it does really feel kind of like that, but I also think that assessment is a bit too harsh. I'm kind of calling back to my reviews of Welcome Stranger and The Sky Pirate. Yes, the cowboy and pirate affectations in those two episodes were very much over the top. But if you look past that, both of those stories are fun and exciting, and before long, you even begin to find some charm in those over-the-top qualities. And that's kind of what we have here. I get that this episode might have just as easily been titled Hillbillies in Space. But look past that hillbilliness for just a moment, and what we have is really a very good and interesting story, and the guest stars are wonderful in their roles. More on all of that in a moment, but let me first go ahead and rattle off some of this episode's negatives, as admittedly there are many. One is the opening scene with the time capsule. It's essentially a hallmark of Season 2 that opening scenes are completely nutty. Before long, we'll see opening scenes that feature everything from bowling, to Smith teaching the kids about gambling by using the robot as a spinner, to rehearsing plays complete with sets and costumes, and more. Well, we have some of that here. Smith, Will, and Penny are packing a time capsule? Just who do they think will find it? More importantly, why would they sacrifice the use of what may still be necessary equipment and clothing? Especially while they still have a spaceship that is, as we are later to discover, filled with expendable things like bowling balls, badminton sets, and cash registers. It just all seems so silly. And then there's the dialogue. I guess we can give a pass to Will's comment that the Egyptians built time capsules that they called pyramids. Now, while the pyramids have been valuable in helping us learn about their civilization, they were obviously built as tombs, not time capsules. Then, the robot identifies the howling as coming from a Canis lupus, which Smith decries as confirmation that there is a werewolf nearby, but a Canis lupus is the scientific name for an ordinary wolf. Here too, this can be rationalized away as just Smith's hyperbole, but then we have Will saying,
A werewolf?
A werewolf? On this planet?
Why should this planet be an exception?
Now, what does that mean? It implies that werewolves actually do exist on Earth, but it would be crazy for them to be on their planet now. That line ends up being silly for multiple reasons. All of this could have been addressed so much better with just a bit more attention to the script, and it's a shame that that never happened, as these little things do always attract my attention and drag on my enjoyment of this episode. Likewise, there are the tracks that we see transition from an animal's large paw print to not a bare foot, but a shoe print, which obviously doesn't make sense. Why didn't they just create a human-looking footprint the same way they did when Will became invisible in Ghost in Space? Along the same lines, we later have John musing about the legends of werewolves that, as he says it, none of them have ever proved out. Once again, what does that mean? It would have been so much better and far more believable if the scientifically minded John simply dismissed the very idea of werewolves during that dinner discussion. Speaking of that dinner scene, it is unimaginable that Smith, Will, and Penny would experience something so harrowing as coming face to face with a 7-foot-tall werewolf, such that the robot had to fend him off with an electrical charge, and the topic never comes up before dinner? Even during dinner, John and Maureen seem to have to drag the topic out of everyone, and it just doesn't seem believable. These kind of problems continue throughout the episode, such as when the Robinsons hear the Croppers chanting. We can reasonably assume that the Croppers' camp is some distance from the Jupiter 2. How can two women's voices at only moderate volume be heard on the lower deck inside a spaceship that certainly must be closed up for the evening? Also, while effort demands Will bring her a lock of Don's hair, the robot's power pack is removed. Will pops it in, the robot springs to life, and he is somehow able to express an opinion on what was just said when he was without power. Even this episode's conclusion is rather unsatisfying, especially as Sibylla, who is played so wonderfully, tosses out cheap lines like telling her werewolf child to brush his teeth, as though this dangerous and strong-willed matriarch had suddenly transformed into Lily Munster in the middle of a comedy. It wouldn't have taken much to have all of these negatives addressed far more credibly, and that's what I find most frustrating. It all feels very out of place in what is arguably a more serious Season 1 episode. And that brings me to the question, was this a serious Season 1 episode? especially given its biggest problem, the whole hillbilly theme. The reason this episode feels like one from the depths of Season 2 is because it commits one of Lost in Space's most common sins, casting aliens as an earthly stereotype and then taking that earthly stereotype way too far. Set aside that stereotype for a moment, and what we have is a story that is actually quite good. Nomadic farmers plant their crops, reap their harvest, and leave behind a planet that is consumed by their crops after they're gone. That's a pretty cool premise. The problem, of course, is how these croppers are portrayed. I mean, geez, there's everything from Ephra's Lil Abner tattered rags, to her somewhat cartoonish southern accent, to a spaceship that converts to an open front porch complete with rocking chairs. Let's face it, when Will and Smith first discover their ship, we hear banjo music. Had the nature of these croppers been reimagined as some unearthly form of alien, with the exact same story, this could have been an excellent Season 1 episode. Instead, it's more of a harbinger of the things to come. So no doubt about it, that's a long list of negatives and lost opportunities. That said, even as it is, there are just as many things to enjoy about this one, and best to start with this week's guest stars. Sybilla was wonderfully portrayed by Mercedes McCambridge. This Oscar-winning actress has an immensely long list of credits and is most famous for portraying the demon voice in The Exorcist. In The Space Croppers, we see her skill not just as an actress, but also as a voice actress. She uses and manipulates the quality of her voice so effectively throughout this episode. I love the tone in her voice during one of her opening lines.
It's mother, not more.
And especially her passionate description of what the plants do.
Sybilla? They consume, Zachary. Oh, they consume everything. Until there's not a living thing left. Not a stick. Not a thing. Now, aren't you glad that you proposed to me and I accepted you?
McCambridge fills the screen with charisma, and she's simply fun to watch. Then, of course, there's Ephra, portrayed by Sherry Jackson. She may be the most alluring female guest star of the entire series. Indeed, I'm surprised by the sensuous nature in which she is played, given a show that is targeted towards children during the family hour on the Tiffany Network. Nonetheless, Ephra also has command of the screen whenever she appears. Whether she is being playful with Will, confrontational with Smith, or flirtatious with Don, she is simply fun to watch. She also brings about one of the few giggles I ever get from Judy. When Ephra comes to borrow seasoning, I can only smile at the way Judy indignantly carries off the pail to retrieve it. A quick aside, when Judy returns swinging the pail, we can see quite plainly that the pail is completely empty. Anyway, Ephra also brings to this episode some of its most tense moments, when towards the end we see her turn on a dime, going from charming and flirtatious to absolute fury, threatening Don and then Will. I shouldn't fail to mention our final guest star, Dawson Palmer, as Keel. Dawson appears in very many Lost in Space episodes, but usually as a monster owing to his tall stature and experience as a stunt actor. Space Croppers is one of the few times we get to see his face. It's a funny thing, I imagine Dawson was excited to hear that he would be playing Keel without wearing a monster suit, only to then discover that he doesn't have a single line of dialogue. Guest stars aside, and shortcomings aside, there are any number of fun moments throughout this episode. I like the scene when the crops are being planted and the Robinsons come out to investigate. I enjoy watching the somewhat ceremonial aspect of the croppers' plantings. This is followed by some drama as the Robinsons are confronted quite sternly. Scenes like this, with its depth and multiple layers, offer some perspective on just how large the studio spaces were. That immensity of these sets helps sell the idea that we are viewing activities on an alien planet and not in some Hollywood studio. I also enjoy watching Smith's pursuit of Sybilla. It's hard not to smile over his unwavering relentlessness in the face of equally relentless hostility. It is an ongoing characteristic of Smith that he presses on no matter the odds, and I always seem to find a few smiles in that. It's also worth taking a moment to call out Bob May and his ability to pull off something as difficult as digging a trench from inside that very restrictive robot costume. Finally, as was the case in Welcome Stranger and Monster Plants, the plants in Croppers are very cool. Their animation is well done, the sounds are great, and we see them not only in great numbers, but great variety of styles and sizes as well. As an effect, the plants are all quite convincing. So here, let me leave it to Sibylla to share some final words of wisdom.
A woman needs sweet talk from time to time.
So have we truly fallen off the cliff and the series is now in Season 2 mode? I know many fans believe so, but I have a much more positive take on this episode. Unquestionably, The Space Croppers is very far from such thrilling space adventures as The Derelict or Island in the Sky. But I think it's fair to say that it's at least as far away from other episodes like West of Mars or Space Vikings. The story is a great one. The guest stars are wonderful in their roles. Yes, the whole hillbilly thing could have been played down and maybe even avoided entirely, but that is the nature of where we are in the series. Though we see a fair amount of camping comedy, it has not yet taken up full residence, at least not in my opinion or for my tastes. I don't love The Space Croppers, but I also don't dislike it. I even enjoy it a fair amount. I grade it as a B. That is my lowest rating so far, but acknowledging that there will be C's, D's, and F's along the way, that's still a pretty good grade overall. I rank it 28th of Season 1's 29 episodes. For the full series, I rank it 54th, which is right on the line between the second and the last thirds of the series. If you would like to see the full Lost in Space series, at the time of this recording, it presently airs for free on METV. That said, you can still find the full series on DVD at Walmart for a very reasonable price. Better still, pick up Lost in Space on Blu-ray. On that set, there are some wonderful extras including commentary by the cast. Like I said, I'm a fan, so for me, the Blu-ray is a must-have. I hope you enjoyed my thoughts on The Space Croppers. One of the things I enjoy most about sharing reviews like this is how different fans perceive each episode quite differently, and I invite you to leave your own perspectives below in the comments. Most of all, I hope you will come back to join me when I review our next episode, All That Glitters, a wonderful episode that is predicated on a moral message. I think this is an episode most fans would rate highly, and I look forward to sharing my perspectives on it. Once again, I recommend subscribing so that you don't miss each new installment. Thanks for watching.